How my last class trip broke the trust of the teachers by my class. Me, female, 16 years old, was on a school trip with my secondary school class. I won't say exactly where we went, but what I will say is that this trip changed everything between our class and our teachers. Forever. We are a total of 20 people in this class. 8 girls, 12 boys, and when you add our 2 teachers, Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen, we were 22 people embarking on what was supposed to be the highlight of our final year. The trip we'd been planning since year 10. The trip we'd fundraised for, sold cakes for, washed cars for. The trip that was meant to be our reward for 5 years of hard work. 860 pounds. That's what each of our families paid for this experience. Some of my classmates had parents who'd been saving for months. Others had taken on part-time jobs to contribute. This wasn't just a school trip. It was an investment in memories we were supposed to carry for the rest of our lives. The journey started at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning. We all met at the train station, buzzing with excitement despite the ungodly hour. Everyone was there, me and my best friend Zara, the football lads who never stopped talking about the Premier League, the quiet kids who usually kept to themselves, and yes, the 6 who would eventually ruin everything for all of us. I should probably introduce them, though I'm still angry enough that using their real names feels like giving them more attention than they deserve. There was Jake and Marcus, both 17, who thought they were cooler than everyone else because they'd been held back a year. There was Callum and Dev, who followed Jake and Marcus around like puppies. And then there were the 2 girls, Sienna and Bex, who'd somehow convinced themselves that hanging around with these boys made them edgy and interesting. Looking back now, there were signs. There always are, aren't there? The way they'd huddle together during breaks, whispering and laughing at private jokes. The way they'd disappear during lunch and come back smelling like smoke, even though smoking on school grounds was strictly forbidden. The way they treated rules like suggestions rather than requirements. But we were all so focused on the trip, so excited about getting away from our regular routine, that we didn't pay attention to the warning signs. Or maybe we just didn't want to see them. The train journey was supposed to take 6.5 hours. 6.5 hours of watching the countryside roll by, of playing cards and sharing snacks, of that particular kind of freedom you only feel when you're traveling somewhere new with your friends. It ended up being the worst time of all. The first delay happened 20 minutes into our journey. Signal failure, the announcement said. We'd be moving shortly. Shortly turned into 45 minutes of sitting in a station we'd never heard of, watching the minutes tick by on our phones. This is already a disaster, Zara muttered beside me, scrolling through her Instagram feed. It's fine, I said, trying to stay positive. We'll still get there. Just a bit later than planned. But the delays kept coming. The train was more late than any other I'd ever been on. We missed our first connection. Then our second. What should have been a straightforward journey turned into a nightmare of running between platforms, dragging our luggage behind us, trying to keep 20 teenagers together while Mr. Harrison checked and rechecked the train schedules on his phone. Mrs. Chen, to her credit, kept everyone's spirits up. She led us in singing songs, started games of I Spy, distributed the snacks she'd brought from home. But even her enthusiasm was wearing thin by hour 8, when we were still nowhere near our destination. Are we there yet? Callum called out for the 100th time, and this time nobody laughed. We finally arrived at our destination station at nearly 3 p.m., almost 9 hours after we'd started. Everyone was exhausted, hungry, and irritable. The excitement from that morning had evaporated, replaced by a collective grumpiness that even the prospect of finally reaching the youth hostel couldn't quite dispel. Right, Mr. Harrison said, gathering us all together on the platform. The youth hostel is sending a minibus to collect us. Should be here in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes turned into an hour. When the minibus finally arrived, it could only take half of us at a time, which meant another hour of waiting for the second group. By the time we all finally made it to the youth hostel, it was nearly 6 p.m. and we were all ready to collapse. Except we couldn't find the youth hostel. The minibus driver had dropped us at what he insisted was the correct location, but all we could see was forest. Dense, dark forest that looked like something out of a fairy tale, and not the nice kind. Are you sure this is right? Mrs. Chen asked the driver, her voice tight with stress. This is the address you gave me, he said with a shrug, already pulling away. We ended up in a youth hostel in the middle of the forest, and everyone didn't know where we were because we got lost. Mr. Harrison's phone had no signal. Neither did Mrs. Chen's, neither did any of ours. We were completely cut off from the outside world, standing in a clearing surrounded by trees with our luggage piled around us and the sun starting to set. This is like a horror movie, Zara whispered, and she wasn't wrong. It took us another 45 minutes of walking down increasingly narrow paths before we finally found the youth hostel. It was a large old building that looked like it had been there for decades, with wooden beams and small windows and a general air of having seen better days. But at that point, we didn't care. We were just relieved to have finally arrived. The hostel manager, a cheerful woman in her 50s named Margaret, greeted us warmly and showed us to our rooms. The girls were on the second floor, the boys on the third, and the teachers had rooms on the first floor. The rooms were basic but clean. Bunk beds, small wardrobes, shared bathrooms down the hall. Dinner's at 7, Margaret told us, and breakfast tomorrow is at 8. You've got the common room and the grounds to yourselves this week. You're our only guests. We stayed at the youth hostel that night, and despite the disastrous journey, spirits started to lift. There was something about being in this strange place, cut off from the rest of the world, that felt like an adventure. We unpacked our things, claimed our beds, and by the time we gathered for dinner, people were actually laughing again. The food was simple but good, shepherd's pie and vegetables followed by apple crumble and custard. We sat at long wooden tables in the dining hall, and for a while it felt like maybe this trip would be okay after all. After dinner, we were all outside in the evening and still played football. The hostel had a large field behind it, and someone had found an old football in the common room. The boys immediately organized a game, and some of us girls joined in while others sat on the grass and talked. It was one of those perfect summer evenings, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze and the sun setting behind the trees. The kind of evening that makes you feel like you're in a movie, like this moment is significant somehow, like you'll remember it forever. And I will remember it, but not for the reasons I thought I would. Jake, Marcus, Callum, Dev, Sienna, and Bex were all playing football with the rest of us. They seemed normal, engaged, part of the group. If they were planning anything, they hit it well. Mr. Harrison was playing too, running around with an enthusiasm that made him seem younger than his 40-something years. Mrs. Chen sat on the grass with some of the quieter students, chatting and laughing. Everything felt normal. Good even. This is actually pretty nice, Zara said, flopping down on the grass beside me during a break in the game. I mean, the journey was hell, but this is nice. Yeah, I agreed, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It is. We played until it got too dark to see the ball properly, and then we all trooped back inside. Margaret had set up hot chocolate in the common room, and we sat around drinking it and playing card games until Mrs. Chen announced it was time for bed. Big day tomorrow, she said. We're hiking to the lake, remember? So everyone needs a good night's sleep. We all groaned good-naturedly but complied, heading to our respective rooms. The girls gathered in one of the larger rooms for a while, sitting on the beds and talking in whispers about boys and school and what we were going to do after graduation. I can't believe we're almost done, Sienna said, and there was something wistful in her voice. Like, in 2 weeks, we'll never have to see most of these people again. Don't say that, Bex protested. We'll stay in touch. Will we, though? Sienna asked. Really? It was a sobering thought. In 2 weeks, our class would scatter. Some of us were going to university, others to apprenticeships or jobs. Some were taking gap years to travel. We'd been together for 5 years, and soon we'd be strangers again. Maybe that's why what happened the next day hurt so much. Because we were already mourning the end of something, and then 6 people decided to blow it all up early. I fell asleep that night thinking about the future, about change, about how nothing stays the same forever. I had no idea that by this time tomorrow, we'd all be on our way home, our trip canceled, our trust broken, our final weeks of school forever tainted by what was about to happen. The next morning, when we got breakfast from the youth hostel and then went up to pack our things, everything still seemed fine. We ate scrambled eggs and toast, drank orange juice, complained about having to pack our bags for the hike. Normal teenage stuff. It was 9:30 a.m. when everything fell apart. We were supposed to meet in the common room at 10 a.m., ready to start our hike. Most of us were already there by 9:45, bags packed with water bottles and snacks, wearing our hiking boots and sun cream. But 6 people were missing. Has anyone seen Jake and Marcus? Mr. Harrison asked, checking his watch. Nobody had. What about Sienna and Bex? Nope. Callum, Dev? Silence. Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen exchanged a look. The kind of look teachers give each other when they know something's wrong but don't want to alarm the students yet. Right, Mr. Harrison said. Mrs. Chen, you stay here with everyone. I'll go check their rooms. He came back 5 minutes later, shaking his head. They're not in their rooms. Their bags are packed, but they're not there. That's when we heard it, laughter from outside. Male voices, female voices, all of them sounding far too pleased with themselves. And that's when Mr. Harrison looked out the window and saw them, 6 students from my class, 2 girls and 4 boys, just going into the forest past my teacher who was still outside from earlier, having kicked the ball around a bit. The teacher found it so strange and went after them after 5 minutes. And what he found would end our trip before it had really begun. The teacher found it so strange and went after them after 5 minutes and caught them taking drugs and smoking. I wasn't there when it happened. None of us were, except for the 6 of them and Mr. Harrison. But I've pieced together what happened from the conversations I overheard later, from the whispers that spread through our group, from the look on Mr. Harrison's face when he came back. Mr. Harrison had been outside, enjoying the morning air and kicking a football around by himself while he waited for everyone to gather. He'd seen the 6 of them walk past him, heading toward the forest path, and at first he hadn't thought much of it. Maybe they were getting some fresh air before the hike. Maybe they wanted to take some photos. But something about the way they were moving, quickly, furtively, constantly looking back over their shoulders, made him uneasy. And when 5 minutes passed and they hadn't returned, that uneasiness turned into suspicion. He followed the path they'd taken, walking quickly through the trees. It wasn't hard to track them. They'd been laughing and talking loudly, confident that nobody would follow them this far into the forest. He found them in a small clearing about 10 minutes' walk from the hostel. They were sitting in a circle on the ground, and the smell hit him before he even saw what they were doing. Smoke. Not cigarette smoke. Something sweeter, more pungent. And there, in the middle of their circle, was the evidence. I won't mention the drugs they had with them, But let's just say it was enough to get them expelled, enough to get the police involved, enough to end our trip before it had barely begun. They were so absorbed in what they were doing that they didn't even notice Mr. Harrison approaching until he was standing right there, looking down at them with an expression of profound disappointment. "What?" he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Do you think you're doing?" I can only imagine the panic that must have flooded through them in that moment. The scrambling to hide the evidence, the stammered excuses, the desperate attempts to explain it away as something innocent. But there was no explaining this away. Mr. Harrison had seen everything. The teacher took them all directly with him and then told my class teacher. We others at that time were already ready to go, standing in the common room with our packed bags, wondering what was taking so long. Mrs. Chen's phone rang. She'd walked to a spot near the hostel where there was just enough signal to receive calls. We watched her face change as she listened to whatever Mr. Harrison was telling her. Confusion, then shock, then anger, then something that looked like defeat. When she hung up, she looked at all of us, the 14 students who'd done nothing wrong, who were just waiting to start our hike, and I saw her trying to figure out what to say. "There's been an incident," she finally said. "Mr. Harrison is bringing some of your classmates back to the hostel. We're going to need to have a serious discussion about what happens next." "What kind of incident?" Zara asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "I'll explain when everyone's together," Mrs. Chen said, but her tone made it clear that whatever had happened, it was bad. We waited in tense silence. Some people sat down, others paced. Everyone was checking their phones, even though there was no signal, just for something to do with their hands. When Mr. Harrison finally appeared with the 6 of them, the atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Jake and Marcus were trying to look defiant, like they didn't care that they'd been caught. Callum and Dev looked scared. Sienna was crying. Bex was staring at the floor, her face pale. "Everyone sit down," Mr. Harrison said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not anger exactly, something worse. Disappointment so profound it was almost physical. We sat. The 6 of them stood at the front of the room like criminals awaiting sentencing. "I'm not going to go into details about what these 6 students were doing in the forest," Mr. Harrison said. "But I will say that it was serious enough that they can no longer remain on this trip. They will be going home today." A murmur ran through the group. "Going home already? We'd only been here one night." "That's not fair," Jake protested. You were just breaking the law," Mr. Harrison interrupted. "You were just putting yourselves and everyone else on this trip at risk. You were just violating every rule we set before we left, every agreement you and your parents signed. But there is no but, Jake. You made your choice. Now you have to live with the consequences." My class teacher was talking to the other 6 in a room, one of the small meeting rooms off the main common area. We could hear raised voices, though we couldn't make out the words. Mrs. Chen stayed with the rest of us, and the silence was excruciating. "This is so stupid," someone muttered behind me. "Why should we all be punished for what they did?" But we didn't know yet just how punished we were about to be. When they came out after a while, the teachers decided that we would all go home. All of us, the entire trip canceled. The explanation was logical, even if it was devastating. We only had 2 teachers, and one teacher would have to bring the 6 home because they were no longer allowed to stay on the class trip. And since we would then only have one teacher who had to take care of 16 students, which was not possible because there had to be at least 2 teachers for safety and supervision reasons, we all had to go home. "You can't be serious," Zara said, standing up. "We didn't do anything wrong. Why should we be punished for what they did?" "This isn't a punishment," Mrs. Chen said, though her voice suggested she didn't quite believe that herself. "It's a safety issue. We can't legally supervise 16 students with only one teacher, especially not in an unfamiliar location with no phone signal." "So get another teacher to come," someone else suggested. "It's not that simple," Mr. Harrison said. "We're in the middle of nowhere. It would take hours for another teacher to get here, and we'd need to arrange cover for their classes, and look, I know this isn't fair. I know you're all angry, but this is the situation we're in." "Because of them," I said, looking at the 6 who'd ruined everything. "Because they couldn't follow the rules for one day." Jake rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. We were just having a bit of fun. It's not that serious." The room exploded. Everyone started talking at once, shouting at Jake and the others, expressing their anger and frustration and disappointment. Mrs. Chen had to literally shout to get everyone to calm down. "Enough," she yelled. "I know you're upset. You have every right to be upset. But shouting at each other isn't going to change anything. We need to pack up and get ready to leave." "When?" someone asked. "As soon as possible. We'll try to catch the 2 p.m. train back." 2 p.m. It was barely 11 a.m. We'd been here less than 24 hours, and it was already over. The next few hours were a blur of angry packing, tearful phone calls home, and a general atmosphere of disbelief. Margaret, the hostel manager, was sympathetic but couldn't offer any solutions. The money had been paid, the booking was non-refundable, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Then, when we informed our parents, we all had to go home again, and we didn't even get the $860 back because the trip couldn't be canceled. £860 gone. All those months of fundraising, all those part-time jobs, all those sacrifices our families had made, Wasted. My mom was furious when I called her. Not at me, but at the situation, at the unfairness of it all. You're telling me you have to come home because other students broke the rules? She said, her voice tight with anger. And we don't get any money back? That's what they're saying, I confirmed, fighting back tears. This is ridiculous. I'm going to call the school. This can't be legal. But it was legal. The contract we'd all signed made it clear that the trip could be canceled for safety reasons, and that refunds would only be given if the cancellation was due to circumstances beyond the school's control. 6 students breaking the law definitely didn't count as beyond the school's control. The journey home was even worse than the journey there. We were all crammed into train carriages, exhausted and angry and disappointed. The 6 who'd caused all this sat together at one end of the carriage, while the rest of us clustered at the other end, shooting them dirty looks and muttering about how unfair this all was. Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen sat separately, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. I almost felt sorry for them. They'd been looking forward to this trip too, had planned activities and excursions, had wanted to give us a good final memory of our time at school. And now it was all ruined. We got back to our town at nearly 10 p.m., 16 hours after we left the youth hostel that morning. Everyone's parents were waiting at the station, and the atmosphere was tense. Some parents were angry at the school, others were angry at the 6 students who'd caused the problem, and a few were angry at their own children for reasons I didn't quite understand. My mom hugged me tight when she saw me. "I'm so sorry, love," she said. "This isn't fair on you." "I know," I said, and finally let myself cry. When we all had to go back to school the next day because we actually had a class trip, but it was canceled, and we still had to go to school the next day, the reality of what had happened really sank in. We were supposed to be away for a week. We'd been gone for barely a day. And now we were back in our regular classrooms, sitting at our regular desks, pretending like nothing had happened. Except everything had happened. The 6 were also there, but because all that they wasn't interested, they were just laughing. Actually laughing. Like the whole thing was a joke, like they hadn't just ruined the trip for everyone, like they hadn't just cost our families hundreds of pounds for nothing. "Can you believe we got sent home for that?" Jake was saying loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Such an overreaction, right?" Marcus agreed. "Like, it's not even that serious. Teachers need to chill." They also said to us that they did something good to us, that we should be thanking them for getting us out of a boring trip, that we were better off at home anyway, that the youth hostel was crap and the hike would have been terrible. "You're welcome," Sienna said with a smirk when she passed my desk. "Saved you from a week of pretending to enjoy nature." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her stupid friends and their complete lack of remorse. But I didn't, because what was the point? They clearly didn't care. They'd made that abundantly clear. We were in our last 2 weeks of school, and they just deducted shit the last 2 weeks. They do it all year, but not as bad as these 2 weeks. Deducted shit doesn't quite capture it. They were actively trying to make everyone else's lives miserable. Like they were angry that we were angry at them. Like they needed to prove they didn't care what anyone thought. They disrupted lessons, talked back to teachers, started arguments in the hallways. They made inappropriate jokes during our final assemblies. They vandalized the yearbook display. They did everything they could to make sure that our last memories of school would be tainted by their presence. And the worst part? They seemed to be enjoying it. "Why are they like this?" Zara asked one day as we watched Jake deliberately knock someone's books off their desk and laugh about it. "Because they can be," I said. "Because there are no real consequences. They already ruined the trip. What else can the school do to them?" As it turned out, quite a lot. But we didn't know that yet. Through this action, our teacher no longer had confidence in us. That's the part that hurt the most, I think. Not the canceled trip, not the lost money, not even the disruption to our final weeks. It was the way Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen looked at us now. All of us, not just the 6 who'd actually done something wrong. The trust was gone. Completely, utterly gone. We always had to have the windows on tilt. Before the trip, teachers would open the windows fully on hot days, let fresh air circulate through the stuffy classrooms. Now, they were only allowed to be tilted, just enough to let in a bit of air, but not enough for anyone to climb out or throw anything through. "This is insane," Zara muttered during a particularly sweltering afternoon in our English class. "We're not going to jump out the window." "They don't know that," I said, watching Mr. Harrison adjust the window to exactly the right angle, tilted but not open. "Not anymore." He did not leave us alone. Ever. Before the trip, if we had a free period or study time, teachers would sometimes leave us to work independently, checking in occasionally but trusting us to stay on task. Now there was always an adult in the room. Always someone watching, monitoring, making sure we weren't doing anything we shouldn't be. Even during our breaks when we were supposed to have freedom to relax and socialize, there were teachers stationed at every corner of the school grounds. Not obviously watching us, but there. Always there. Our mobile phones were bagged. This was the policy that caused the most outrage. Every morning, as soon as we entered the classroom, we had to put our phones in individual bags that were then locked in a cabinet until the end of the day. "This is a violation of our rights," Jake protested on the first day of the new policy, which was rich coming from him considering he was the reason for the policy in the first place. "You have no rights to your phone during school hours," Mr. Harrison said calmly. "This is school property, and we set the rules. If you don't like it, you're welcome to leave your phone at home." But none of us did, of course. We were teenagers. Our phones were extensions of ourselves. So every morning we reluctantly handed them over, and every afternoon we snatched them back the moment we were allowed. And when we had a break, he and other teachers watched us all the time. Not just Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen, but teachers we didn't even have classes with. Teachers who'd never paid much attention to our year group before were suddenly very interested in what we were doing during lunch, during breaks, during any unsupervised moment. "I feel like a criminal," one of my classmates said one day as we sat in the cafeteria, very aware of the 3 teachers positioned around the room, all of them watching our table. "We are criminals," Jake said loudly from the next table over. "Didn't you know? We're the most dangerous class in the school." He said it like it was a joke, like it was something to be proud of. But the rest of us didn't find it funny. The other students in the school noticed, of course. It's hard not to notice when one class is being treated completely differently from everyone else. "Why do you lot have to bag your phones?" A year 10 student asked me one day. "Because some people in our class are idiots," I said, not bothering to lower my voice. "That's harsh," she said. It's true. The rumors spread quickly. Our class had done drugs on a school trip. Our class had gotten the trip canceled. Our class couldn't be trusted. Our class was the problem class. Never mind that it was only 6 people out of 20. Never mind that the rest of us had done nothing wrong. We were all tarred with the same brush, all suffering the same consequences, all living under the same cloud of suspicion. The 6, meanwhile, seemed completely unbothered by any of it. They swaggered through the hallways like they owned the place. They made jokes about the trip, about getting caught, about how stupid the teachers were for making such a big deal out of nothing. They wore their rebellion like a badge of honor. "At least we're not boring," Beck said one day in the common room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "At least we actually live our lives instead of just following rules like sheep." "You cost everyone $860, someone shot back. "That's not living your life. That's being selfish." "Whatever," Beck said with a shrug. "Not my problem if your parents can't afford it." That almost started a fight. Several people stood up, ready to physically confront her, but the ever-present teachers intervened before anything could happen. "Enough," Mrs. Chen said sharply. "Everyone sit down, now." We sat. But the anger didn't dissipate. It just simmered, building day by day, week by week. The school administration tried to handle the situation. The 6 were called into meetings with the head teacher. Their parents were called in. There was talk of suspensions, of expulsions, of involving the police. But we were so close to the end of the year. Just 2 weeks left. And I think the school decided it was easier to just let us finish, to get us out the door and make us someone else's problem, rather than deal with the complicated process of formal disciplinary action. So the 6 got detention. They got stern talking tos. They got letters sent home to their parents. But they didn't get expelled. They didn't even get suspended. And they knew they'd gotten away with it. "See?" Jake said one day, grinning at the rest of us. "All that fuss for nothing. We're still here, aren't we?" "You shouldn't be," I said before I could stop myself. "But we are," he said, leaning back in his chair. "And there's nothing you can do about it." He was right, and that was the most frustrating part. There was nothing we could do. We couldn't get our money back. We couldn't get our trip back. We couldn't even get an apology that meant anything. All we could do was count down the days until graduation and hope we never had to see these people again. The preparations for graduation continued despite everything. There were rehearsals for the ceremony, fittings for our gowns, meetings about the after-party that some of the parents were organizing. Everyone was trying to focus on the positive, on celebrating our achievements, on ending our school years on a high note. But it was hard to feel celebratory when every day was a reminder of what we'd lost. Yesterday was my graduation. The day we'd been working toward for 5 years. The day that was supposed to be perfect, memorable, the culmination of our secondary school experience. And we had just distributed so many teachers everywhere to see if my class didn't do anything stupid or something. I'm not exaggerating. There were teachers stationed at every entrance to the school hall where the ceremony was taking place. Teachers in the corridors, teachers in the bathrooms, teachers in the parking lot, teachers everywhere, all of them watching our class specifically, making sure we didn't ruin this too. It was humiliating. Other classes were allowed to move freely, to take photos with their friends, to enjoy the day. But our class? We were escorted everywhere. We were monitored constantly. We were treated like we couldn't be trusted to behave appropriately at our own graduation. And whose fault was that? The 6 who'd ruined everything, of course. But did they care? Did they show any remorse? Any understanding of what they'd done? Everyone in my class was pissed off at the 6, and the 6 didn't itch. They did their thing. Didn't itch is probably too mild a phrase. They didn't care. They didn't give a single damn about how angry everyone was, about how they'd ruined our final weeks, about how they'd tainted what should have been happy memories. During the graduation ceremony itself, while the rest of us sat quietly and respectfully, listening to speeches about our futures and our potential, the 6 whispered and laughed and made jokes. When Jake's name was called to receive his certificate, he did a ridiculous bow that made some people in the audience laugh but made most of us cringe. When Sienna walked across the stage, she blew kisses to the audience like she was some kind of celebrity. Bex took a selfie while shaking the head teacher's hand. Marcus dabbed. Callum and Dev did some kind of elaborate handshake that took so long the head teacher had to clear his throat to get them to move along. They were making a mockery of the whole thing. And the teachers couldn't do anything about it because it was graduation, and there were parents watching, and making a scene would only make things worse. I sat in my seat wearing my graduation gown, holding my certificate, and felt nothing but anger and disappointment. This should have been a happy day. This should have been a day of celebration, of looking back on good memories and looking forward to bright futures. Instead, it was just another reminder of how 6 selfish people had ruined everything for everyone else. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the school cafeteria. Sandwiches and cakes, juice and tea, parents mingling with teachers and students. It should have been nice. It should have been a chance to say goodbye properly, to exchange contact information, to promise to stay in touch. But the atmosphere was tense. The teachers were still watching us. The 6 were still acting like idiots. And the rest of us were just trying to get through it without incident. I can't wait to never see them again, Zara said, nodding toward where Jake and Marcus were loudly recounting some story to a group of younger students who looked both impressed and horrified. 2 more hours, I said, checking my watch. Then we're done. We never have to come back here. Thank God, Zara said. My mom found me in the crowd and pulled me into a hug. I'm so proud of you, she said. You worked so hard for this. Thanks, Mum, I said, hugging her back. I'm sorry about the trip, she added quietly. I know how much you were looking forward to it. It's okay, I lied. It doesn't matter now. But it did matter. It would always matter. Those 6 people had stolen something from us, not just money, not just a trip, but the chance to end our school years on our own terms. They'd taken our autonomy, our trust, our ability to be treated like responsible young adults, and they'd done it without a second thought, without remorse, without any understanding of the impact of their actions. As the reception wound down, and people started to leave, I found myself standing with a group of my classmates, the ones who'd been on the trip, the ones who'd lost their money, the ones who'd spent the last 2 weeks being treated like criminals because of someone else's choices. We should do something, someone suggested. Like organize our own trip or something. Show them that they didn't ruin everything. With what money? Someone else asked. We're all broke from paying for the trip that didn't happen. Maybe in a few months, I said. When we've all saved up a bit. We could do a weekend somewhere. Just us, the people who actually wanted to be there. There were nods of agreement, murmurs of, yeah, that could work, and I'd be up for that. We never did organize that trip. Life got in the way. University, jobs, new friends, new experiences. We scattered like we knew we would, and the group chat we created that day gradually went quiet as we all moved on with our lives. But I still think about it sometimes. About what that trip could have been. About the memories we should have made. About the trust that was broken and never quite repaired. And I think about the 6 who caused it all. And wonder if they ever think about it too. If they ever regret what they did. If they ever understand the ripple effects of their actions. Somehow I doubt it. Looking back now, months after graduation, I can see the whole situation more clearly. The anger has faded, not completely, but enough that I can think about it without wanting to punch something. What happened on that trip, and in the weeks that followed, taught me things I never expected to learn in my final year of secondary school. Not the kind of things you find in textbooks or exam papers, but real lessons about people, about consequences, about the way one person's choices can ripple out and affect dozens of others. The first lesson was about accountability, or rather the lack of it. Jake, Marcus, Callum, Dev, Sienna, and Bex never really faced consequences that matched what they'd done. Sure, they got detentions. Sure, they had uncomfortable meetings with the head teacher. Sure, their parents were called in, and there were stern conversations about responsibility and respect. But at the end of the day, they still graduated. They still walked across that stage and received their certificates. They still got to move on with their lives as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the rest of us lost $860 each, lost a trip we'd been planning for years, and spent our final weeks of school being treated like we couldn't be trusted. The injustice of it burned. It still burns, if I'm honest. But I learned something important from that injustice. The world isn't fair. Sometimes people do terrible things and get away with it. Sometimes the innocent suffer while the guilty walk free. And sometimes, no matter how much you want justice, you don't get it. That's a hard lesson to learn at 16. But maybe it's better to learn it then than to go through life expecting fairness and being constantly disappointed. The second lesson was about collective punishment and why it's so damaging. When the teachers started treating all of us differently, bagging our phones, watching us constantly, restricting our freedom, they were trying to prevent future incidents. I understand that. They were scared that if they didn't crack down hard, other students might think they could get away with similar behavior. But what they actually did was alienate the 14 of us who'd done nothing wrong. They made us feel like criminals. They took away our autonomy at a time when we were supposed to be preparing for adult life. They sent a message that individual actions don't matter. If someone in your group messes up, you all pay the price. And that created resentment. Not just toward the 6 who'd caused the problem, but toward the teachers and the school administration. We felt betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect us and treat us fairly. I learned that collective punishment doesn't work. It doesn't prevent bad behavior. It just breeds anger and distrust. and it punishes the wrong people. If I'm ever in a position of authority, I'll remember that. I'll remember how it felt to be treated like I'd done something wrong when I hadn't, and I'll try to do better. The third lesson was about peer pressure and the importance of choosing your friends carefully. I don't think Callum and Dev really wanted to do what they did that morning in the forest. I think they were followers, going along with Jake and Marcus because they wanted to be accepted, because they thought it made them cool, because they didn't have the courage to say no. And look where it got them. They ruined their own trip, cost their families hundreds of pounds, and damaged their reputations, all because they couldn't stand up to two idiots who didn't care about anyone but themselves. Sienna and Bex were the same. I'd known both of them since year 7, and they hadn't always been like this. They'd been normal girls with normal interests and normal friend groups. But somewhere along the way, they'd decided that being edgy and rebellious was more important than being kind or responsible. They'd chosen to associate with people who brought out the worst in them, and they'd paid the price for that choice. I learned to be more careful about who I spend my time with. Not in a judgmental way, but in a self-protective way. Because the people you surround yourself with influence your choices, your behavior, your future. And if you choose poorly, you can end up somewhere you never intended to be. The fourth lesson was about the long-term impact of short-term decisions. That morning in the forest probably seemed like fun to the 6 of them. A bit of rebellion, a bit of excitement, a chance to do something forbidden. I doubt they thought about the consequences. I doubt they considered what would happen if they got caught. They were living in the moment, making a choice based on immediate gratification without thinking about the future. And that one choice, that one stupid, thoughtless decision, had consequences that lasted far beyond that morning. It affected their final weeks of school. It affected their relationships with their classmates. It affected how teachers viewed them. It probably affected their references for university or jobs. And it affected all of us too. 14 innocent people who had to deal with the fallout of someone else's bad decision. I learned to think before acting. To consider not just what I want to do right now, but what the consequences might be tomorrow, next week, next year. To understand that every choice has ripple effects, and that I'm responsible for those effects whether I intended them or not. The fifth lesson was about forgiveness, and the fact that some things are harder to forgive than others. In the months since graduation, I've run into some of my former classmates around town. We chat, we catch up, we reminisce about the good times we had together. And mostly I've been able to move past the anger and disappointment of those final weeks. But when I see Jake or Marcus or any of the others, I cross the street. I pretend I haven't seen them, because I'm not ready to forgive them yet. Maybe I never will be. And I've learned that's okay. Forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who've hurt you. It's not a requirement or an obligation. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge that someone wronged you and choose to move on without forgiving them. They took something from me, from all of us, that we can never get back. And while I'm not going to spend my life being angry about it, I'm also not going to pretend it didn't matter. The sixth lesson was about the importance of speaking up. During those final 2 weeks, when the 6 were making everyone's lives miserable, most of us stayed quiet. We complained to each other, we muttered under our breaths, we shot dirty looks across the classroom. But we didn't really speak up. We didn't formally complain to the administration. We didn't organize as a group to demand better treatment. We just endured it and waited for it to be over. And I regret that now. Because maybe if we'd been more vocal, if we'd made more noise, if we demanded accountability more forcefully, things would have been different. Maybe the 6 would have faced real consequences. Maybe the teachers would have realized that punishing all of us wasn't fair or effective. Or maybe nothing would have changed. But at least we would have tried. I learned that silence is complicity. That if you see something wrong and say nothing, you're part of the problem. That speaking up is hard and uncomfortable and sometimes doesn't work, but it's still important to try. The 7th and final lesson was about resilience. Despite everything that happened, we survived. We got through those awful final weeks. We graduated. We moved on with our lives. The trip was ruined, yes. The money was lost, yes. The trust was broken, yes. But we didn't let it destroy us. We didn't let 6 selfish people define our entire school experience. We still have good memories from our 5 years at that school. We still have friendships that have lasted beyond graduation. We still learned and grew and became the people we were meant to become. What happened was unfair and frustrating and disappointing. But it wasn't the end of the world. It was just a setback, a bad experience, a story we'll tell in the future about that time everything went wrong. And I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. That I can handle disappointment and injustice and still come out okay on the other side. That resilience isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about getting back up again. So where are we all now, 6 months after graduation? Most of us are at university or in apprenticeships or working. We're scattered across the country, pursuing different dreams and building different lives. The group chat from graduation day is mostly quiet now, with occasional messages when someone has news to share or wants to organize a reunion. Zara and I are still close. We're at different universities, but we text almost every day and visit each other when we can. We've talked about organizing that trip we mentioned at graduation, just the people who actually wanted to be there, doing something fun together without the shadow of what happened hanging over us. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but it's nice to think about. As for the 6, I've heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. Jake's at university somewhere down south, apparently still acting like he's cooler than everyone else. Marcus is working at his dad's company. Callum and Dev are doing apprenticeships. Sienna's taking a gap year to find herself. Bex is at a local college. I don't know if they ever think about what they did. I don't know if they regret it, if they've learned from it, if they've grown as people. And honestly, I don't really care anymore. They're not my problem. They're not my responsibility. They're just people I used to know who made bad choices that affected me, and now they're moving on with their lives just like I'm moving on with mine. The difference is, I learned something from the experience. I grew from it. I became more aware, more careful, more resilient. I hope they did too, but I'm not holding my breath. If I could go back and change what happened, would I? Part of me says yes, absolutely. I'd love to have those memories of a successful trip, of hiking to the lake and exploring the forest and bonding with my classmates in a beautiful location. I'd love to have my 860 back. I'd love to have ended my school years on a high note instead of under a cloud of suspicion and disappointment. But another part of me recognizes that what happened, as awful as it was, taught me things I needed to learn. About fairness and accountability. About choosing friends wisely. About thinking before acting. About speaking up and being resilient. Those are valuable lessons. Painful lessons, but valuable ones. So maybe I wouldn't change it after all. Maybe everything happened exactly the way it needed to happen for me to become the person I am now. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself to make peace with something I can't change anyway. Either way, it's over now. The trip is long past, graduation is behind me, and I'm building a new life that has nothing to do with secondary school or class trips or 6 people who made bad choices. I'm at university now studying psychology. Maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe going through this experience made me more interested in understanding why people do what they do. Why some people take responsibility for their actions while others don't. Why collective punishment feels so wrong even when it's meant to prevent future problems. I'm learning about group dynamics and social psychology and moral development. I'm learning about the teenage brain and risk-taking behavior and peer pressure. I'm learning about restorative justice and accountability and the difference between punishment and rehabilitation. And every time I learn something new, I think about that trip, about what happened and why it happened and what could have been done differently. Maybe someday I'll work with young people, helping them navigate the complicated social dynamics of adolescence. Maybe I'll work in schools, helping administrators develop better policies for dealing with behavioral issues. Maybe I'll do research on bullying or peer pressure or collective punishment. Or maybe I'll do something completely different. I'm only 16 months past graduation. I have time to figure it out. But whatever I do, I'll carry those lessons with me. The good and the bad, the fair and the unfair. The things I learned from what happened on that trip and in those final weeks of school. Because that's what experiences are for, right? To teach us. To shape us. To help us grow into better, wiser, more resilient versions of ourselves. Even the bad experiences. Especially the bad experiences. So to Jake, Marcus, Callum, Dev, Sienna, and Bex, I'm not going to thank you for what you did. You don't deserve thanks. You were selfish and thoughtless, and you hurt a lot of people without caring. But I will acknowledge that your actions taught me things I needed to learn. And for that, not for what you did, but for what I learned from it, I'm grateful. And to everyone else who was on that trip, who lost their money and their memories and their trust in the system, I see you. I understand your anger and your disappointment. And I hope you found a way to move forward, to take the lessons from that experience and use them to build better lives. We deserved better. We deserved the trip we'd planned and paid for. We deserved to be treated fairly. We deserved to end our school years with joy instead of frustration. But we didn't get what we deserved. And that's okay, because we survived anyway. We're stronger for it. We're wiser for it. And that's worth something. Maybe not 860, but something.